First item on the agenda is the public comment. Do we have any public comment?
There are no public comments.
All right, that was easy. Second item on the agenda is to approve the May 5th, 2021 minutes. I need a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. All right, next item is 4 information items, and we're going to start off with superstar Ron Pierce.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. We'll be pretty quick this morning. Just a couple of updates. Number one, the governor has the budget. Governor received the budget from the legislature yesterday. We're actually expecting him to sign the budget at any moment. Should be done between now and 10 o'clock. We expect to see vetoes very shortly. With regards to the budget, Brad asked us to give you kind of an update on 2 things this morning. We've got some answers on. Number one was specifically funding for the late shift program, which I'll kind of have Caitlin give that update. Once Caitlin gives that update, I want to talk a little bit about Rule 1490 as it relates to TNCs and funding for TNCs as it relates to potentially the late shift program moving forward. So, Caitlin.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, everyone. As Ron mentioned, Brad asked us to reach out to DOT to get some clarification as it relates to how the late shift program is currently funded through the MCOR legislation. So as you know, under President Galvano, there was $10 million through DOT allocated for transportation disadvantaged programs throughout the state. So that's how PSTA currently gets the funding for a late shift program. This year, there was a bill filed and passed to repeal the program, and it's now waiting to go to Governor DeSantis' desk for his signature of approval. So there was a bit of confusion because DOT is still going forward with accepting applications and approving projects like the late shift program for next year. But unfortunately, when and if the governor does sign the MCOR's repealer legislation, those dollars will go away. They're still allocated. There's still going to be a vote at DOT on Friday to approve PSTA's project. But unfortunately, if the governor signs that legislation before June 30th, that source of funds goes away with MCORs. But I think Ron has a light at the end of the tunnel and maybe some innovative ways PSTA could get through that unfortunate news.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. And so the punchline there is we do expect the governor to sign the MCOR's legislation, even though the $10 million is a part of the budget process. Once he signs the repealer bill, that $10 million will not be allocated for any project. So if to Caitlin's point, if the Transportation Disadvantage Commission moves forward with a vote later this week, if the governor signs, there's again MCOR, those dollars will not be there. However, so maybe some good news would be is I know Brad and his team's already been working on potentially looking at trying to get DOT to fund it with alternative funds. One of the things that Brad asked us to do to reach out to Uber was there's a current outdated FDOT rule. It's Rule 14-90, which covers public transportation requirements as it delivers public transportation to the public. In there's only 2 exceptions as it relates to how DOT dollars can be spent on TNCs. One of them is to the Transportation Disadvantage Program, which it doesn't seem like funding will be available there. And then there's one other exception as it relates to where the customer gets a choice and they can get to choose a TNC or a taxi if they want. But then there's a lot of different things that go into that, daily inspections and some other things I won't bore you with. DOT's been working for a while on revising that rule because that rule was written well before TNCs became in existence within state law. And so I talked to Alan yesterday. I'll let Alan jump in here in a second. I talked to Uber yesterday. Uber is now going to engage on this as well to make sure that DOT actually changes that rules where PST will be able to work with DOT on alternative funding that they can use on the late shift program based upon the rule changes. And so that's something that I think Uber wants to get engaged with. We talked to DOT briefly about it yesterday. I think that's something they want to try to get done. I think it needs to get done sooner than later. I know Alan's going to have some conversations with the governor's office. We also need to probably talk to Senator Hooper as the vice chair of the TED committee. I think he can weigh in with DOT as well. So Alan, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Just to add,
Ron and I talked yesterday. As he said, the governor's going to sign the budget today and do the vetoes. Once that's out of the way, obviously they still have some significant policy stuff, but that really clears the plate for some other issues that they can work on. So we're going to have a conversation with Chris Spencer, the policy and budget director, as well as Stephanie Kopelousis, who is the legislative affairs director, but she's actually over the Department of Transportation. Obviously, she's a former secretary, so she's very, very knowledgeable of that. So we're going to make sure that we're checking in with them on the rulemaking and kind of the whole litany of things that Ron just walked you through. I think they can be helpful in trying to move towards a successful result here. So we're going to be doing that after today, once the budget's off the plate. So.
And Mr. Chairman, that's our committee report. Brad, I'm not sure if you've got any questions based upon the answers of those two questions you wanted us to answer for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Go ahead, Brad.
Thank you, Ron, for that. Yes, we'll be hopeful to find some kind of innovative way to keep that great program going. The other two issues I think that are kind of outstanding at the state level are, one, assuming that the governor signs the budget that includes the funding for T-BARDA, to know where that funding might come from locally, and two, any progress. I know there's been some communication with the governor's office and a proposal, I think some positive proposal on using some of the VW settlement funds for transit buses, or a plan that includes a goal of using 25% of the available VW funds for transit buses. So that's a positive milestone or thing that's happened in the last month, I think. If you want to make any comment on either of those, or if you know anything about either of those two things.
Yeah, so Brad, number one, on the T-BARDA funding, as we talked about, we need to kind of get through today to see if it makes it. If it does make it and it's not vetoed, I think the plan there is T-BARDA wants to then meet with DOT directly and talk about some ways. At our last, and in fact, our last T-BARDA meeting, I think you had heard me make some comments about. Yeah. We want to sit down with DOT, they being T-BARDA, and have a conversation about, let's come up with some creative ways to make sure that, since it is funded through Transportation Trust Fund dollars, let's make sure that there's not an impact on our transit partners. And so I know that meeting will be scheduled once we get through today, which we're hopeful will not get vetoed, by the way. We've had some conversations, and we have not been told it's going to be vetoed, and usually by now we would know if it's going to be vetoed. So hopefully keep our fingers crossed there. That's number one. Number two, on VW settlement, I think that's something we can actually add to our list when we talk to Chris Spencer and Stephanie Kopelousis in the governor's office. So, Alan, we may want to add that as kind of, 1A to our list of things to talk with them about with regard to the VW settlement, and then also follow back up with DEP. Brad, I'm not sure if you noticed, DEP, by the way, is going to have a new secretary coming in. Yeah. The current secretary is stepping down later this month, and so there'll be another transition over at DEP we'll have to work with as well.
All right. Thank you very much. Ron, appreciate everything. Yep, Gina, go ahead.
Thank you. Brad, you mentioned, if we don't get this funding, thank you. If we don't get this funding, that we can find some other ways to continue funding, that innovative program. Do you have anything specific in mind that we could zero in on?
Yes. As Ron and Caitlin were just describing, our best idea is to use some Florida DOT grant funding to support it, probably at a lower level, but at an acceptable level, at least right now, still affected by the pandemic, that we can keep the program going. The problem is this rule that doesn't allow us to use Florida DOT dollars for this kind of program. We would only be able to run it with taxis. And there's not as many taxis in Pinellas County as there are Ubers and Lyfts these days. So hopefully the rule can get changed, and then customers will not have to wait nearly as long to wait for a taxi. The backup plan to that is, we're open to any ideas that you might have, but one idea we came up with, and Chair Gerard thought it was a good idea and made a call to introduce me, is Career Source Pinellas. It has some access to grant programs for access to jobs, to get people jobs, and that's exactly what this program does. And so that's sort of our second goal, is to meet with them and see if they might have any grant opportunities that can help us support the program.
Okay, and this actually might be a question for Commissioner Long. Is there a possibility that we could partner with T-BARDA to address this? Do you think that there would be any interest there in helping to keep this program going? It's extremely important for, you know, our folks who are out there, you know, working hard, trying to get into like a better bracket in life, you know? And this is really helping them to access jobs, often jobs that actually pay the bills. And so we've got to find some way to step up. And I wonder if one of our other partners, such as T-BARDA, could be helpful.
I do think that T-BARDA is part of my first option, the DOT funds, that either PSDA would get its own DOT funds or partner with T-BARDA on using some of their funds that they have not spent yet. They have a relatively large amount of grant funds from the DOT that Secretary Gwynn and Commissioner Long and and Debbie Leas are all trying to make sure that they spend wisely. And so
Right.
that might be a possible source. Again, the T-BARDA funds, though, are just like whether we got our own grant, we need to get this rule changed.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that this is something that would not just affect Pinellas County, but, you know, many in our region.
Oh, yeah,
So this could be an opportunity to, you know, solicit their help and work as a partner.
Yeah.
All right, do we have any other questions?
Commissioner Long, if Commissioner Long has anything to add to that, she's our T-BARDA guru, so I'd love to hear from her if she has any initial thoughts on that idea.
I think for T-BARDA, it would be a bit of a heavy lift for a couple of reasons, because it's a large board. There's a lot of conflicting interest on that board, and it would have to be, I don't know how you would measure who's going across county lines, because their mission is to transport people across county lines.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm certainly not opposed to discussing it, but I do recognize that there are several, in the region, there are several other transit agencies, and what you do for one, you'd have to do for all of them. And for instance, I know Manatees, they bring their transit folks over to the veterans hospitals in our region and come to Bay Pines and then go right back again several times a day. So they'd want to participate, and I'm sure Pasco would. I mean, and so would Hart probably, right? Am I wrong, Brad?
You're right.
Yeah. So
For
that's
Ford,
where,
yeah.
that's where the hiccup could be. And I'm
Okay.
not saying it can't be done, I just think it would be difficult. But if it was easy, it would have been figured out already.
So true. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Madam Chair, would you like to take over the meeting from here? Welcome.
Well, just in time, thank you, and I apologize, because I thought I would be early, because I wanted to chat with Brad for a minute, but traffic got in my way. I wish you guys could do something about that. Good morning, Harry. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
Would you like
Morning.
to weigh in and give us your perspective from what's going on in DC these days?
Sure, I'll lead off and then pass off to Steve. big news, I guess, is Friday, the president finally released his fiscal year 22 budget request. Steve's going to give you kind of an overview of that, but that's the action that sort of kicks off the federal appropriations process. Congress is actually in a recess period. The House is in the middle week of a 3-week recess. They'll come back the week after next. The Senate's in a 1-week recess. They'll be back next week. And I'm sure you're all reading the Senate Republicans continue to negotiate with the administration to see if there's any prospect of developing a bipartisan infrastructure package. Senator Capito, who's been the lead negotiator, is actually going down to see the president this afternoon at the White House. Secretary Buttigieg was on the talk show Sunday saying that he thinks that Monday's kind of the cutoff to decide whether there's going to be a bipartisan agreement or not. I don't think the president, Steve, has set a deadline like that yet. The House, I think Steve may talk about this, is scheduled to, in committee, the Transportation Committee, mark up a transportation bill on June 9th. The Speaker wants to get something through the House by the 4th of July. The Senate is a little bit behind. They marked up a highway bill, what Steve will talk about, on a 20-0 vote out of their committee, which is 2 years in a row now. They've gotten a unanimous vote out of committee. It's only the highway portion of the infrastructure bill, doesn't include transit. Steve will talk about that. Senator Schumer, the majority leader in the Senate, wants to get something through the Senate before the August recess. We'll see how that goes. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but with Congress out of session this week, it's other than Senator Capito and her negotiations, it's a pretty quiet week. And let me pass over to Steve, and he can give you his update.
Thanks, Harry, and thanks, commissioners. I could start off probably just summarize by saying it's infrastructure week again. Even though the Congress is in recess, like Harry mentioned, there's still a lot going on. Let me go back to the president's budget, which was sent to Capitol Hill on Friday. There isn't really much to report on transit. It's a fairly flat budget. The formula funds are exactly the same as they were in this fiscal year, proposed for next year. There's a little bit of it, about an 8% increase for bus and bus facility and low-no grant programs. And there's $1 billion for the RAISE program, the old build program. So there's really a status quo budget for next year. But what the budget did shine light on is what President Biden's infrastructure proposal means for transit and other DOT programs. You might recall it's about $85 billion is what he has proposed for transit, new spending on top of current spending. That's about $17 billion a year. It would break out for expansion, most of it would go for state of good repair. There would be money for expansion, and there would be money for ADA improvements. So that's the proposal. But as Harry mentioned, the Republicans have put together a proposal to counter President Biden's infrastructure offer. Now let's move over from the budget into the infrastructure offer. You recall he proposed $2.25 trillion overall for infrastructure. He came down to 1.7. The Republicans have made an offer of $928 billion, and this is over 8 years, I should say. And what's important about it is for transit, all of the president's $85 billion is new spending. The Senate Republicans have proposed no new money for transit. So there would actually be a slight decrease in overall spending over that period of time. So from a PSTA perspective, the Senate Republican proposal thus far, now it could change today when that meeting at the White House that Harry mentioned happens. Thus far, there's no new money for transit. It would not be helpful at all for PSTA. Shifting from the infrastructure bill to reauthorization, because we know that has to happen regardless. There has to be some kind of extension or new bill in place to replace the FAST Act. Harry did mention correctly that the House T&I Committee, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, is going to mark up next Wednesday, a week from today. How is that relevant for us? Well, first of all, we know that there are earmarks that will likely be made public, if not before Wednesday, by Wednesday. We have a $6 million earmark request with Congressman Chris that he submitted to the T&I Committee for solar improvements for the electrical charging infrastructure. So we may learn where that stands next week. We're hopeful it is. And as Harry mentioned, there's a desire to try to move that bill through committee. We don't have any details on the reauthorization bill itself, nor do we have any details on what the Senate will do on transit, other than the chair of the committee has introduced two bills. One of them is to authorize about almost $1 billion or $1 trillion over 5 years for electric buses, zero emission buses. So there's a real movement in the Senate by Banking Committee Chairman Sherrod Brown from Ohio to move to electric buses. And he also has a bill to authorize $5 billion over 5 years for ADA improvements. So that's consistent with Biden's infrastructure proposal. So we can expect to see a real emphasis on those two programs when the Senate puts together its bill a little bit later, probably this month as well. Lastly, they're trying to, on reauthorization and the infrastructure bill, they're trying to make every way they can to make this a bipartisan bill. The Democrats hope to be able to use, if they can't make it bipartisan, streamlined budget process known as budget reconciliation. It's not ideal because earmarks would not be considered if that happens. So we'll keep you up to date on that as that develops. But that will not happen until sometime. We won't know that until sometime in July. And lastly, the FTA Administrator, Nuria Fernandez, was approved by the Banking Committee for her nomination to be administrator. It was reported out unanimously, no opposition from anyone. Now, when will she be confirmed by the full Senate? That's to be determined because the Senate's really got a full schedule this month of June when they come back. And it's not clear that how much time they're going to devote to nominations because they've got voting rights legislation. They've got a number of bills that they consider to be crucial. So it's going to be a very packed agenda, not only for infrastructure, but I think in Washington this month because they're trying to get as much as they can done before the August recess. So with that, happy to turn it back for any other questions.
Hey, Steve, one other thing to add. You talked about the Lono. I think, if I remember correctly, Steve, there's $250 million in the president's request for Lono buses this year, which is up from, I think, about $180 million in the current budget.
Yeah, correct.
So that's a good increase. And one other thing, Brad, I know PSTA has always been on the innovative front. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. In the budget request, the secretary talks about some transit research programs. There's $30 million in there for 3 programs, Brad. $15 million is for new mobility trends research. And one of the things they're looking at is first mile, last mile innovations to improve access and safety for transit users. So they're trying to, make better use of routes. So that's a potential, depending on how the Congress funds that. There's a second $10 million research project to accelerate the adoption of zero emission buses, looking at specific vehicle specifications and operational charging related infrastructure requirements. So another $10 million there I know you're focused on zero emission and you're doing some great things with solar, so that may be something for you. And then there's a $5 million research line for safety, passenger safety. I'm not sure, there's not a lot of detail on that. The other thing, Brad, there's $7.5 million in the president's request for technical assistance and training to support training activities for the next generation of workers to support transit agencies. I know there's some concern about learning new technologies and servicing new technologies. So there's another $7.5 million. I don't know, Steve, where that goes in the appropriations and the budgeting process, but those are some things that at least are in the budget request that might be we'll track for you and maybe something worth talking to your delegation about, Brad.
Yeah.
So I had a question, excuse me, I had a question for Steve. Way back when you were talking about the different appropriations and you referenced a $6 million request from Congressman Christ, and it had to do with innovation and advances in technology.
For solar arrays for the electric charging facility infrastructure.
Commissioner, that's an earmark request in the transportation infrastructure version. We have, the PSTA submitted to Congressman Christ an earmark request, spending request in the appropriations process for the inline charger system, the en-route charger systems. I think it was $2 million, Brad. And then in the highway infrastructure package, the House was accepting requests for earmarked projects there. And PSTA, you all submitted $6 million request to Congressman Chris for aligning solar panels there at the headquarters to use in part for charging the electric buses and for your other electric needs there. And we know that PSTA has responded to a number of questions from the committee about that. So we know it's under serious consideration, and find out, I guess, sometime later this month, Steve, how those earmarks play out.
Probably next week. Once the committee approves the bill, they'll have those public.
And Commissioner, just the Senate did not, the Senate, as I understand it, Steve, so far has not entertained earmark requests in their version of the infrastructure bill. Is that correct?
Correct.
Well, I was going to ask a loaded question, but my better angels are sitting on my shoulder. Oh, come on. Oh, I know, I just want to say it so bad. Is the Senate going to do anything this session? I'm just asking one thing. Can they get one big thing done, you think?
Steve used to work in the Senate, so I'll let him answer that question.
I couldn't help myself.
I have my doubts, Commissioner.
Ay, ay,
So-
ay.
So Commissioner, just, I mean, the negotiations continue, but, you know, the Republicans don't want to agree to any tax increases, and they're proposing user fees and reclaiming some of the COVID relief dollars. That's to pay for their transportation plan. And the Democrats don't want to do that. And so they can't agree on how to fund it. The House or the Senate Republicans have proposed spreading the infrastructure package out over 8 years, correct, Steve, versus 5.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know where the Senate is on that. And the dollar figures are substantially different. The current Republican plan is just short of $1 trillion, and the president was at 2.3 trillion. So they're not, I mean, in answer to your question, they're not very close. Now, the one thing that is under consideration, discussion again this week, is the Senate going ahead and trying to use the budget reconciliation process, excuse me, to try and expedite getting an infrastructure bill through Congress this year. It would only require a simple majority vote in the Senate as opposed to 60 votes like they did with the last COVID relief package. So that seems to be picking up more steam this week, but that has its own set of challenges too. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to comment on that, but that's a problem.
Well, I'll just say the interstate highway system legislation was passed on a voice vote. You can see how things have changed when they first created the Highway Trust Fund and created, you know, the program, you know, in the 50s and 60s to fund that program. So things have changed. There is a deal there. Should Republicans and Democrats really want to get an infrastructure bill done? As a county commissioner, this isn't what you want to hear, but the Democrats could give up some of the state and local funding for next year that hasn't been appropriated yet. And the Republicans could agree to cut some of their corporate taxes. But I think both parties don't really want to give in right now.
No, and to the contrary, Steve, I'm open to hearing anything where they can reach some kind of a collaborative path towards actually getting something done, because, you know, while there's all this partisan nonsense getting in the way of good public policy, I promise you, there's Republicans and Democrats using public transportation and driving on the highways. So, you know, can we just focus on the real reality of living in the world we live in today? That would be nice.
Agree.
Thank you. Well, very good report. Carry on. And since this is carry on and wave your magic wand. Come on, make it happen. So, with all of that said that you just did, and this is a legislative committee, do we have an agenda for any proposed visits with some of our folks other than over the phone and on Zoom? I can hear the crickets for the silence.
Well,
Yeah.
you mean come to Washington, you mean visit with them in Washington, come up there? Yeah,
Well,
I think right now the Capitol, I guess we'll find out more when Congress comes back from its recess. It seems like things are starting to ease up a little bit right now. The congressional buildings are open for limited visitation. You can't just walk in. You have to be escorted from the door, the security checkpoint to the office, and then back to the checkpoint again. So we find it's, Steve, I'd estimate it's about a 50-50 proposition on whether staffs are in the office or not. Again, we'll find out in June when Congress is back in session how much starts to return to normal. We're sort of assuming that after Labor Day is when we'll probably see more of a return to normal in Washington. And so I think right now Zoom is still probably the preferred way to do meetings, at least for a couple weeks. And Commissioner, it's like anything else in Washington right now. Some offices are full at it like normal, and others are still working from home. It's kind of a matter of personal preference for each office. It's not necessarily political. I mean, there's some Republican offices that are working from home, and there's some that are working from the office, and same way with the Democrats. I mean, and Steve and I have been doing Zoom calls the last couple of weeks, and most of the staff has been working from home. So,
Well,
you know,
that's
if
why-
you're thinking about coming up to Washington, I would probably defer till after Labor Day.
You what?
I would defer until after Labor Day if you're thinking about making a Washington trip. Steve, I don't know what you're hearing.
I totally agree, because Harry talked about Congress, but the agency people are still working from home too.
So just FYI, for whatever it's worth, the county commission is planning on going back to the courthouse in August.
In August.
Yes. So, and our numbers are down to 2.3 in Pinellas County, so we feel very fortunate and very good about where we are from a public health perspective.
Well, and Commissioner, I'll just add, the reason Harry mentions after Labor Day, things might return to normal is that Washington, as you recall, typically goes on vacation in August. So it would make sense that would kind of be a starting point after Labor Day then, when everyone comes back to work.
Yeah. Okay.
And Commissioner, there's also, in addition to the COVID challenge, there's also the security challenge. That's still, some of those challenges haven't been addressed since what happened in January. And, throughout the year, there have been some security concerns. The fences are, the one perimeter fence is still up around the Capitol, so it's still not. So you have a COVID challenge about the health safety going into the buildings, and you also have the safety aspect of how many people are they going to allow to wander through the buildings. So they haven't addressed that yet.
All right. Well, any other questions, David?
Thank you. Has the raise grant,
Mr. Fisher,
oh, I'm sorry, thought it was.
oh, no, oh, yeah, you did. There you go.
Well,
The
yeah,
raise grant, any changes in that, or how does that looking? Is that still on
There-
schedule?
Yeah, they're proposing next year, $1 billion. So Congress could change the criteria, but as of right now, it would stay at $1 billion. For this current fiscal year, half that money has to go to, $500 million has to go to urban programs, $500 has to go to rural programs. They may change that next year, but that was, that's something that Congress has never been authorized, so there's no structure to the program. They could change it easily every year, but they're proposing to continue that.
And Commissioner, your application, Brad, I think the application is due the middle of July. The current application you're working on for the transit center is due mid-July. I think it's July 16th, correct, Brad?
That's right, yes,
July 16th?
Yes.
Okay.
yeah. And to Commissioner Long's point about engaging with our delegation, Harry and Steve and I discussed about Congressman Christ, trying to engage him on the Clearwater Transit Center application, maybe after the 16th of July, when it's turned in, maybe either having him talk to maybe the editorial board, or having some event maybe, or some kind of well-timed positive news story that then we could send up to Washington DC with Congressman Christ quoted in the article supporting the project. Might help us down the road when they're deciding on it. Might be an additional thing to do with him. And then, as Steve and Harry described, right now Congressman Christ has done great things for us, and I don't know how better to support him, but he is now, as a member of Congress, arguing for his earmarks. He's got 10 in the appropriations process, and then he's, I don't know, Harry, if you know, like maybe just ours, maybe just 1 or 2 in the transportation authorization process that he's arguing with his folks up there to lobby for Pinellas County. So we're grateful that he's doing that for us too. And hopefully we'll, like Steve said, maybe next week we'll know, right? If we're successful on that.
Anyone else? No questions? Thank you very much for your report, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have other business to discuss?
I don't think so.
Well, in that case, then, we are adjourned.
Great job, Madam Chair.
Oh, yeah, well, thank you for pinch hitting for me. Brad, I have a few thoughts I would like to share.
Okay. Good.
All right, I'll see you in the morning, big guy.
So, why
You guys be safe.
Yeah. Should be interesting. It's my first trip travel.